My friends, it isn't easy to keep a secret, is it? Especially if it's a really good secret and a good story, something so dramatic and even unusual or exciting. We can hardly resist the temptation to tell someone. Well, this being the case, we can really sympathize with the man in today's gospel. He was a leper, and that was one of the worst possible fates that could befall a person in first century Palestine. Its victims were condemned to a life of loneliness and isolation. They were allowed to mingle with no one but other lepers. Then one day, this particular leper met Jesus, with the result of being cured of his leprosy. And he became, once again, a functioning member of his community. But here we find a very curious thing. After his cure, Jesus gave him strict instructions to tell no one about it. Think of that. Here was a person who had been isolated from family and friends because of some terrible disease. Now he could go back to those same people and renew his friendships and relationships with them. But he was not to tell anyone how he had been healed or by whom. Well, as it turned out, the man just couldn't keep a secret. The story said the man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. Now, I'm really not surprised by the story's ending. And all through the New Testament, we are commanded to be verbal witnesses of Jesus, to tell others what Christ has done for us. Yet here's a man who has been blessed beyond measure, who was told to remain silent. We have to wonder why. Well, I think part of the answer to that question is fairly obvious. St. Mark tells us that after the cure, that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. Instead, Jesus had to remain outside in deserted places, and people kept coming to him from everywhere. Now, this was really not the kind of publicity that Jesus wanted or even needed, but the leper's testimony was actually more of a hindrance than a help to Jesus. That is at least part of the reason why Jesus asked him to keep the healing secret. Well, I think there was more to it than that. I think it had to do with something more like the leper himself. When I look at Jesus, I see someone whose singular commitment was to help people. You see it reflected in everything that he did and everything that he said. When Jesus told the man to be silent, he wasn't simply protecting his own privacy. I think it was also intended as a ministry to the leper himself. Jesus told him to be silent because at that particular time in the leper's life, silence was one of the things he needed most. There are times when you and I need exactly the same thing. Every life should have a quiet, a secret side. What the man in our story needed most was not to talk, but to think. Later on, it might have been okay to talk about what happened. But first, he needed something besides a sensational story to tell. One wonders if the man ever came to grips with who Jesus was. Like, who was this man who healed me? Why did he do it? What did it all mean? How could he handle this new lease on life? Those were kind of the key questions. And unless that man faced them squarely and answered them honestly, then his miracle, wonderful as it was, really never made a difference in his life. And the same thing applies to you and to me. Every day in 100 different ways, God touches us. He touches our lives just as surely as Jesus touched that leper that day. And the problem that most of us have is that we don't always slow down or shut up long enough to even realize it. I think that Jesus may have had this in mind when he told the leper to remain silent and to keep a secret. He was trying to save him perhaps from his shallowness. Every life needs a quiet place where they can treasure up some sacred moments known only to God.